I don't think any of us go into, a facilitation of a workshop without having an outcome in mind. And we're quite clear about what the outcome might be. But it's a little bit like agile leadership. You're not quite necessarily sure how you're going to get to the outcome. You've got a plan, but you typically have 2 or 3 plans, each of which could take you to the outcome. You might have a preferred one.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Paul from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Rob from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Rich from Thinking Focus.
And the question is, what should I do when I realise that my workshop plan might not be working? And we can also go, podcast plan might not be working. I think for the sake of this one as well. So this is part of a short series of podcasts that we've done about how facilitators work. And I've got Rob.
Facilitators.
Or not.
That came out weird. That sounded like
I'm
potatoes.
It's because I was thinking of you two. I'm going to do it again. So this is part of a short series that we've created on facilitation and the role of the facilitator and the work that they do. And that's why I've got Rob and Rich, who've been facilitating workshops for 700-800 years. Did we work this out?
Oh dear. The reason we're laughing, if you've not listened to the others in the series, is because Paul keeps putting that number up drastically every time we do one of these podcasts.
Yeah, by a couple of 100 years each time.
A couple of 100 years, yeah. And Rob's old, but he's not that old.
Oh yeah, focus on me. Can we go back to the previous podcast about arguments and difficult people?
Right. So I'd like to get back to my plan because I need to understand. Yeah. Well, I felt like I could talk about this podcast on my own because I work with you two and none of my plans for these things have ever worked. But seriously, there is a point, I guess, in when you're working with a group that you must go, even though you've planned it, you've got a structure, you know exactly what's going to happen. You must go, this isn't going to work. What typically are the reasons why it's not going to work? Why does that happen?
Well, controversially, I'm going to challenge the last part of that sentence because you sort of go, you know exactly what's going to happen. I don't think you ever do. I think you've got a good, I don't think any of us go into, a facilitation of a workshop without having an outcome in mind. And we're quite clear about what the outcome might be. But it's a little bit like agile leadership. You're not quite necessarily sure how you're going to get to the outcome. You've got a plan that takes you in the direction. But, I don't know about you, Rich. Well, I think I do. But you typically have 2 or 3 plans, each of which could take you to the outcome. You might have a preferred one. So there's plan A, let's call it that you go, I think this is what's going to happen. This is what I've got planned in. We know what the outcome's supposed to be. Let's get going. But actually, there are, I think, in my experience anyway, always variations to the plan. Some of them quite small, but some of them sometimes fundamental. And I think maybe, Paul, that's what this podcast is about. What happens about the fundamental ones?
So before we get to that then, so it's a really interesting point. So in essence, when we say, when you realise my plan might not be working, that's really regular, isn't it? You're almost constantly saying...
Yeah.
Oh, it's every time.
So almost... And I've worked with you two and I've watched you work over the years. It's almost like, actually, that's what the facilitator does in the coffee break.
Yeah.
Group, you go and get a coffee. I'm now going to go, where the hell are we? Where do I need to go next to get to where I want to be?
Not even, it's not always as structured as that. Quite often you've got the group working on something and you're thinking, okay, we were going to do this. Me and Rob were working together yesterday in a workshop.
Yeah.
And exactly this happened. We get them doing something and then we get our heads together. We've worked together so often we know what each other's thinking most of the time, which is the thing we were going to do next is not relevant now.
Well, that's true. 800 years is a long time to work with.
A long time. Because the discussion that the group have just had has meant the next piece that we had planned isn't relevant. So let's skip that. And what if we did, and we'll come up with an idea, what if we did this? Because I think this will be the most relevant thing. So
there's a really important point there for me, which is you've got to let go of the idea that you actually have a plan.
Yeah.
You have an
outcome. You've got an outcome. You've got a place where you're trying to get to with the particular group you're working with. As Rob said, you might have some plans about how you can get there, but because the discussion might be fluid, that might mean that your plans have to change. So you have to let go. You have to let go of the thought process of I must cover all my plan, otherwise it's not worked.
Yes, it's almost like having a map of where I'm going to end up at this particular location, but I'm going to accept that as I'm walking, I'm going to get blown off track.
Yeah, well, but not only that, but you might choose to go off track. I mean, if you take your analogy, you sort of go, I know that I'm heading for Paris, France, but the different options of getting to Paris, France are many.
Yeah.
So, and each of them might have merits.
And as long as I end up in Paris, France.
Correct.
Why are we saying Paris, France? Why can't it just be Paris? Why Paris, France? True.
Because there's Paris, Alabama, and there's Paris elsewhere.
Paris, Alabama. Where's Alabama? Anyway, I think
because Rob's been to more places than you and I, Rich. He knows there is more than one Paris.
I don't think we needed the France bit.
Alabama doesn't actually exist.
No, it doesn't.
I do appreciate that.
But that you
see, look, focus on the outcome, not on the plan.
Exactly. That's the thing. Your plan is almost for you to go, how am I going to get us to this outcome? But you've got a mindset of, I might need to flex. Now, occasionally, what's more challenges is when the outcome changes.
Right. And I think that's really what we're getting to in the heart of this question, which is changing your plan. That's just Tuesday. That's just a normal day's working, that you're constantly adjusting where you're going and how you're running the workshop.
But let's not trivialize it, because actually, if you're a less experienced facilitator, lots of facilitators go into this having been maybe a trainer, for example. And quite often, if you're training content, there is a process to go through the content, which means you kind of have to follow the process. Because if you don't, you might miss a piece of content, which means that whatever it is doesn't work. If you're taking that analogy into facilitation, you might struggle because facilitation is fluid. It's not like you're training a piece of content. It's not A followed by B followed by C. So that can be quite difficult for some people, and it is a big thing when you first get into it to realize you've got to focus on the outcome, not necessarily your plan.
And the other element about planning, and facilitators, we will still have a series of plans, as we've talked about, and do the planning. It gives you a sense of comfort. So, I mean, I've come across many trainers who have comfort or confidence instilled into them because they've got this plan that they follow. And actually, if they have to flex off it, they either can't flex off it because they don't have the confidence to, or if they attempt to because that's what's happening in the room, it all goes wrong. So, there is quite a difference between that, and a recognition that planning gives you the comfort and the confidence that you've got certain things that you can do and use. And actually facilitation, I think, is that, and to Rich's point, it's a sort of almost a higher form of that, because you have to go, this is a series of things that you need to draw on, but you have to be flexible and you have to know that, or even expect that it's not a rigid thing that you're following.
Okay, so in essence, the biggest mistake you can make is to get too lost in your plan and try and force the group to follow the way you want to do it. You're actually just nudging them towards the outcome. You're just pushing them in the right direction. And actually how you get there is a much more agile process than it may appear to even a workshop delegate.
It is agile. I believe it's agile. Absolutely. I mean, and Rich, you probably are similar to this. And you made the reference before, Paul, about coffee break. Typically at every break, I am replanning. Not necessarily fundamentally, but I'm going, right, where are we? What do we need to do? Is this what we need to be doing next? What becomes less relevant, more relevant? Do I skip this bit? Do I add in something else? Every couple of hours, that replanning or that rethinking happens.
Yeah. So it's like an ongoing constant calibration.
Yeah.
Against where am I? Where do I need to get to? What's the next best step? Because I've got my outcome in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that there are a number of occasions where actually the outcome changes. What kind of things would cause that to happen?
You usually go into these things having had several conversations with the person that sponsored it. So you're briefed and you've got a plan and you know what the outcome is. Maybe you get into the room and you start that and it becomes to light really early one or two things. Either that's not relevant and the group are in a place where they've gone past it, or you can't get them to the outcome because there's something fundamentally wrong that they need to discuss first.
Yeah.
So, we do quite a lot with organizational change. So let's just, take an example where a change has happened, and let's say that the person that sort of sponsoring the workshop wants to discuss how we implement that change, for example. So you go into the workshop with that brief and you're all set. But after, the first 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, you realise people in the room have not come to terms with it. So they can't talk about how we implement it because they've not come to terms with it yet. So what you might do then is, have in your head, you're thinking, I need to replan this. You might do the coffee break thing where you then go and talk to the sponsor and you say, look, we're going to have to just change direction a little bit here because these guys have not come to terms with what's happened. And then you're going to have to then quickly replan what you're going to do to have some different conversations to help them process the change that's been going on. And that's happened many, many times in stuff I've been working on. And if you don't do that, your workshop will just fall apart because you focused on something that isn't practical.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I've been the most sort of fundamental situation that I've been in is when a workshop has been halted. We've had to change so fundamentally because we're not going to be able to get to the outcome that the sponsor or the organization thought was the direction of travel, that we've agreed at lunchtime to halt the workshop because it needs something else has to happen in the organization before they carry on and do the next bit. And it was just becoming painfully obvious. That's only ever happened once.
So that's kind of the extreme.
Yeah.
Typically, though, what would you do at that point? So imagine that situation that you were in, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
So it's blindingly clear at this point, we're not going to end up here. Do you involve the group at that point?
Yes, because the group had to be communicated with because it was becoming clear to the group, and it was and thank the Lord, the integrity of the client sponsor in this case, with the conversation that we had over lunchtime. What happened afterwards, after lunch, was the group was got back together, and I'm not going to use the word apology, but an explanation was communicated from the most senior director there in the company to the group to go, this is what's happening. This has been brought to our attention. We need to do this with you. Sorry about the fact that we've got you together without prepping you to this extent. So here's what's going to happen next. And we saw each other again a week later when that piece had been covered off. So as you say, it's an extreme. That's only ever happened once.
But typically, what would actually happen if you went, look, there isn't other things we need to do. We need to reframe the reference of this workshop.
Yeah.
How would you recraft that halfway through the day?
The recrafting with the group for me is we would then go into question mode. We'd go, listen, so the things that we need to cover off here, what are the key questions that we need to get to the bottom of? And the group can be involved in actually generating, crafting, putting the thought process into those things that need to be covered off, so that you're not, you're harnessing the group and the energy of the group on the topic in this, in the thing that they're involved in.
So is that in essence getting them to redefine the outcome for the workshop?
Not necessarily the outcome, but actually thinking about what are the key things that actually need to be asked here so that answers can be sought. And the way that those answers can be sought could actually happen in various different ways. But you're basically going, we need to recalibrate here, and we're involving you in the recalibration process.
I did a series of workshops a number of years ago for a customer, and there was no sponsor on site. So what they'd done is they'd said what they wanted, and then off I went to these different sites to run these workshops with these people. And I really quickly in the first one realised, it's the example I was giving before, a change had been announced. I really quickly realised we couldn't have the discussion they wanted to have because they just weren't there. I'd got nobody to talk to. I'd got no sponsor on site, and I'd got like 20 odd of these sites to go around. I got nobody on site. So I just made a decision. Right, okay, let's just pause the implementation bit. Let's just talk about how you're feeling about this. What's going on in your heads? Where are you with this? What do you think's good about it? What don't you think's good about it? And I just got an outpouring of stuff from people, captured it all. Now, what was good is that they then had got that out of the system, which obviously they needed to do to be able to process it. But I then had to go back to the customer and to say, couldn't achieve the objective, and here's why. Here's what happened. Here's where people are. I've got another one of these workshops tomorrow. I'm going to go into it and see what happens and if they're in the same place. Guess what? Got to the next one. They're in exactly the same place. So I did that again. And then I went back to the customer again and said, we can't follow the plan that you've got. I think there's a new plan, which is this, to help people process what's happened. And that's what we did. So you haven't always got someone you can go and talk to. So you either make a decision of, okay, we're going to pause because clearly we can't get where we're trying to get to, and you discuss that with the group, or you do what Rob said, which is you go, okay, what is it we need to answer to be able to move on, and then you work through that together.
And they're both really interesting scenarios. I mean, I think, I know I have, but you probably have as well, where you've been a delegate in a workshop where the facilitator hasn't done that. And I can think of one particular workshop where the facilitator kind of went, yeah, but this is what I've been asked to do. This is the plan.
Yeah.
You're going to do it.
This is what we're doing.
And I think, and ironically, there were probably 8 or 9 delegates in that workshop who were facilitators in their own right, who just fought him all afternoon. Yeah, this poor guy had been brought in to facilitate this group. But he made a rod for his own back because he wasn't able to flex with that group.
Well, that's what we said before, where actually
and he was probably a trainer and not a facilitator.
Possibly.
What you're saying, if you're that facilitator, is you're saying the most important thing is my plan rather than the outcome. Yeah. And there's also a thing in this. You can see young trainers that get into being a trainer early on, having been here, right? So I've done this, is you become focused on, did the people in the room enjoy it? Did they have a good time? And, you get the happy sheets back at the end of the day, and it, 8 out of 10 and 9 out of 10. Oh, great, yeah. But actually, did you achieve the outcome? Did you move it forward? Have they learned anything? No, they had a good time, but that's not relevant. Yes, you want people to, enjoy the process, but that's not the most important thing. And I think exactly what you described there, Paul, is, to that person, the most important thing is maybe that people had a good time and I got through my plan. And then at the end of the day, I can go home saying, yes, I did everything. That's not the point.
Yeah, and actually, just, again, thinking back to that workshop, but I think quite a lot of the ones I run, and I'm sure the same for you guys, I don't want you to have a good time.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you're having a good time, you're probably a bit too comfortable.
Yeah.
And then we're not going to get to the outcome.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be horrible, but I want to find a slightly uncomfortable space that's going to cause the conversation that needs to happen.
Yes.
That's the role of the facilitator.
Yeah, sometimes you need it to be uncomfortable because that's how you're going to make change happen. So, absolutely.
Last thing from me then. What happens when it's the other way around? What happens when you walk in, you start going, you've got, 2 days, you've got all these exercises structured out, you know exactly where you're going to take the group. And then suddenly in the first half hour, you go, they're already there. I don't need to do anything. Would you just stop?
No.
Or does that never happen?
No, it has happened. But I think I'd take you back to Rob's answer, which is, you go
stop and reset.
Stop and reset. Okay, look, you seem to be on with this. You seem to be on top of this. So where do we need to go to next? What's the next step in the plan? And you'd start working that through with them. Now, what might happen is let's say in your example there, Paul, you said you got a couple of days. You might not use the full 2 days, because what you might do is say, let's work out the next part of the plan. Let's work out what the next steps are. Let's work out who we think needs to do what. Then you might pause and say, okay, we need to go away, validate that, and then let's come back together later.
That's interesting, because I have one distinct memory of running a workshop where I got probably an hour into it and thought my plan is completely wrong. My brief is wrong. The outcome is wrong. Everything's wrong. because the group were really adamant. They've done this. They were there. They didn't want to do it again. And I did something, and I'll be honest, and I would never have said this to the group.
Yeah.
It was to create time for me to think. I went, great, I've got some worksheets.
Yeah.
If you've done it all, it will help for the next bit if you just write up what you've done. And I thought they'll be 20 minutes writing it up. And they were 2 days, the whole 2 days were then on those worksheets, because ironically they hadn't done what they thought they'd done. when they're asked to write it up in one sentence, it just all went to pot. And
yeah, that is another good point, because you can do stuff where you say, well, I'll tell you what then, let's just test that.
Yeah, massive learning.
Let's break out into different groups and take us through what you've done and where you're heading and what the next steps are. Because you will sometimes get people, well, no. So have you done it or have you not done it? I'm confused. Where are we?
Yeah.
And then that causes a bit more discussion.
And I'd love to say it was a really carefully thought through strategic move. It wasn't. I was kind of slightly panicking and going, calm down, give yourself time. You can work this out. Get them doing something. But it's made me realise you test it. But you always
you were being a facilitator, Paul. And that's again a fundamental difference. That you were flexing in your own thinking and your own planning because the situation demanded it.
So in a nutshell, what we're talking about today is don't worry about if the plan changes. It probably means you're doing it right. And actually, if you get through the day and your plan hasn't changed at all, you've done everything you thought you were going to do in the timeline you thought you were going to do it, you might need to look at yourself a little bit and go, am I being a little bit too rigid here? Is this too much about me and not enough about them?
Yeah, I think so.
Possibly. But I would add to that, and we've talked about it, it's the relationship. It's the two things that are important: plan and outcome. Because if your plan has gone perfectly to plan, pardon the pun, and you've reached the outcome, then great. There's a very straightforward delivery. But I think you should expect. What's that expression? Plan for the worst. No, plan for the best. Expect the worst. I can't remember.
Yeah, whatever that is. Whatever that is, do that.
Whatever that is. Expect
getting
the worst. No, plan for the worst. Expect the best. Oh, it's completely cut all of this out of the podcast.
It's plan for the worst, expect the best.
Is it?
Right. Okay then.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't think it is.
So you have good intentions. You expect things to go well, but you plan on the basis they're not going to go well.
Right. There we go.
That's what it's trying to tell you. A little bit like this podcast.
Yeah. Yes. I think that is a very good point to leave it.
Next time on The Question Is.
In order to achieve that projects, for example, it's easy to see that there are a number of moving parts, and therefore, if we achieve A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc., then actually all of those added together will achieve the overarching goal that we've got. Because rarely is a goal one single deliverable action task.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organisation, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.